The night was cold, and the rain poured heavily over the streets of Manhattan. The city was alive with bright lights, the sound of honking cars, and people rushing to escape the storm. Among them was Marcus Williams, a man who had worked hard to rise above his struggles. He stepped out of his sleek black BMW, adjusting the cuffs of his expensive suit. He had come a long way from his childhood in a poor neighborhood, and tonight he just wanted a peaceful stay at one of the finest hotels in the city, Regal Crown Hotel. As he walked toward the grand entrance, the golden lights from the hotel's chandelier spilled onto the pavement, reflecting off the wet ground. The doorman barely looked at him before opening the door, letting him step inside. The moment he entered, a wave of warmth and luxury surrounded him. The lobby was breathtaking. Marble floors shined under the golden lights, elegant sofas lined the walls, and a soft melody played from a grand piano in the corner. The guests here were wealthy, dressed in designer clothing, chatting in low voices, sipping expensive drinks. Marcus took a deep breath, enjoying the elegance of the place. He had spent years working for a life where he could afford places like this. Success had not come easy. He had struggled, fought, and sacrificed to reach this level. And now he was here, ready to enjoy a well-deserved night of comfort. He walked toward the front desk, where a young receptionist, Ethan Carter, stood. Ethan was dressed in a crisp uniform, his blonde hair neatly styled, a professional smile fixed on his face. But the moment his eyes landed on Marcus, something changed. The warmth in his expression faded slightly, replaced by something less welcoming. Marcus ignored it. He was used to people underestimating him. It didn't matter. He had more important things to focus on. "Good evening," Marcus said, placing his platinum credit card on the counter. "I'd like to book a penthouse suite for the night." Ethan hesitated. His fingers hovered over the keyboard, but he didn't type anything. Instead, he glanced at Marcus, his expression unreadable. "I'm sorry, sir," Ethan said slowly. "We're fully booked tonight." Marcus frowned. That didn't make sense. He had checked the hotel's website just minutes ago, and there were multiple suites available. "That's strange," Marcus said, keeping his voice calm. "I saw online that you have rooms available." Ethan's lips twitched into a small, almost amused smile. He shook his head. It must be a system error. Marcus narrowed his eyes slightly. Something wasn't right. He had traveled to some of the most exclusive hotels in the world, and he knew when a receptionist was lying. "Are you sure?" Marcus asked, keeping his tone polite but firm. "Could you check again?" Ethan let out a soft chuckle, as if Marcus was wasting his time. He tapped a few keys on the keyboard, barely looking at the screen, and then shook his head. "No rooms available," he said. "Maybe try another hotel." Marcus's jaw tightened. He understood what was happening now. He had experienced this kind of treatment before, the unspoken suggestion that he didn't belong, that he should go somewhere else. It was never said outright, but it was always there, in the small details, in the way people looked at him or hesitated before serving him. A part of him wanted to argue, to demand answers. But another part of him, the one that had learned patience through years of struggle, told him to walk away. He wasn't going to waste his energy proving his worth to someone who had already judged him. He picked up his card and put it back in his wallet. Then he took a step back and gave Ethan a long, steady look. "Thank you for your time," Marcus said, his voice calm but filled with something unreadable. Ethan barely nodded, already turning his attention to the next guest, a wealthy couple who received a much warmer welcome. Marcus turned and walked out of the hotel, stepping back into the rain. The cold water soaked through his suit, but he barely felt it. His mind was elsewhere, thinking about what had just happened. He had come to this hotel expecting luxury, expecting service. Instead, he had been reminded of something else, something he had almost forgotten. The world still had places where people like him were not truly welcome. He stood under the streetlights, watching the golden glow of the hotel's windows, and he made a silent promise to himself. One day, I won't just stay in that hotel. I'll own it. And when that day came, things would be different. The city never slept, but for Marcus Williams, the night after his humiliation at Regal Crown Hotel felt longer than ever. He sat in his penthouse apartment, staring at the rain streaking across the glass windows. The lights of Manhattan blinked in the distance, but his mind was elsewhere. The feeling of being turned away, of being dismissed without a second thought, burned inside him. He had faced rejection before, on the streets where he grew up, in the boardrooms where people doubted him, in meetings where investors refused to believe in him. But this time, it was different. This time, it was personal. Marcus was not an ordinary man. He had built himself from nothing, rising through sheer determination. He had turned small investments into millions, expanded his business across cities, and gained respect in the corporate world. But at that moment, standing outside the hotel in the rain, he realized something. Money alone wasn't enough. People still judged him, still saw him as someone who didn't belong. And if he wanted real power, the kind that truly changed things, he had to think bigger. That night, he made a decision. He wouldn't just forget what happened. He wouldn't argue, wouldn't beg for respect. Instead, he would take something that mattered to them, their pride, their status, their hotel. And when the time was right, he would return. Marcus didn't waste time. The next morning, he called Jonathan Brooks, his closest business partner and a sharp-minded investor from London. Jonathan had always admired Marcus's ability to turn anger into strategy, and when Marcus told him the story, Jonathan leaned back in his chair, smiling through the phone. "So, you're telling me you don't just want revenge," Jonathan said. "You want control." "I want change," Marcus corrected. "And the best way to do that? Own what they think I can't have." Jonathan laughed. "Then let's get to work." For months, Marcus studied Regal Crown Hotel. He learned about its history, its financial struggles, its leadership. He read reports, analyzed profits, and found weaknesses in its management. It wasn't as strong as it seemed. Beneath the expensive marble floors and the polished service, the hotel had problems: high staff turnover, outdated marketing strategies, and a leadership team that was resistant to change. More importantly, the hotel chain was up for sale. The owners, a group of silent investors, had been looking for buyers quietly. They didn't want the public to know. If the word got out, the hotel's reputation would suffer. And that's where Marcus saw his opportunity. Instead of making an open bid, he bought shares in secret. He worked with brokers, using different investment firms, slowly taking control without drawing attention. Every week, he gained a little more power, piece by piece. The best part, no one at the hotel even knew. One evening, Marcus and Jonathan sat in a high-end restaurant overlooking Central Park. Jonathan sipped his whiskey, scrolling through the latest numbers on his phone. "Well, my friend," Jonathan said, setting his glass down, "it's official." Marcus raised an eyebrow. "You, Marcus Williams, are now the majority owner of Regal Crown Hotel." A slow smile spread across Marcus's face. He had done it. The very place that had once refused him a simple room now belonged to him. But Marcus didn't rush in. He didn't fire anyone immediately. He didn't announce his ownership. Instead, he watched. He let the hotel continue as usual, waiting for the perfect moment. He wanted to see how they treated other guests. He wanted to know if Ethan Carter, the receptionist who had refused him, was still working there. And when the time was right, he would walk through those doors not as a guest, but as the owner. This time, no one could turn him away. The evening air was crisp, and the streets of Manhattan buzzed with life. Luxury cars lined the entrance of Regal Crown Hotel, their polished surfaces reflecting the golden glow of the building's grand entrance. Wealthy guests moved in and out, their conversations blending with the soft hum of classical music playing inside. Marcus Williams stepped out of the back seat of a sleek black car. He adjusted the cuff of his tailored suit, his face calm, his eyes sharp. He had been here before, on a night he would never forget. That night, they had turned him away. Tonight, they wouldn't have a choice. He walked toward the entrance, his shoes clicking against the marble steps. The same doorman from before stood at the entrance. Marcus recognized the man's stiff posture, the way his eyes briefly flickered over him before forcing a polite smile. But this time, Marcus didn't wait for approval. He walked in like he owned the place, because now he did. The lobby was just as grand as before. The same expensive chandeliers, the same velvet chairs, the same rich scent of fresh flowers and expensive perfume. But tonight, it felt different. Tonight, Marcus was in control. His eyes scanned the room. And then he saw him, Ethan Carter, the receptionist who had humiliated him. Ethan was behind the front desk, dressed in the same crisp uniform, talking to a wealthy couple. His voice was smooth, professional, full of warmth. A warmth Marcus had never received. Marcus stepped forward, waiting for his turn. When Ethan finished with the couple, he turned with his practiced smile. "Good evening, sir. How may I help?" The words died in his throat. Ethan's polite expression froze as his eyes landed on Marcus. For a moment, there was confusion, then recognition, and finally, a flicker of fear. Marcus let the silence stretch, watching the color drain from Ethan's face. "Hello, Ethan," Marcus said, his voice smooth. Ethan swallowed. I'm sorry. Do we know each other?" Marcus tilted his head slightly, pretending to think. "Oh, I think you do," he said. "A few months ago, I came here. Asked for a room. You said the hotel was fully booked." Ethan's fingers tightened on the desk. I don't remember," Ethan said quickly. "There must have been a mistake." Marcus gave a small smile. "Oh, it wasn't a mistake. You knew exactly what you were doing." Ethan opened his mouth, but no words came out. Marcus leaned in slightly. "Don't worry," he said, his voice calm. "I'm not here as a guest tonight." Ethan frowned. "Then why?" Before he could finish, a voice interrupted. "Mr. Williams." Marcus turned as Richard Hamilton, the hotel's general manager, rushed forward. Unlike Ethan, Richard knew exactly who Marcus was now. His face was full of forced enthusiasm, his hands outstretched in greeting. "Sir, it is such an honor to finally welcome you," Richard said, shaking Marcus's hand eagerly. "We've been expecting you." Ethan's face turned pale. Marcus smiled slightly. He could feel the weight of the moment sinking in for Ethan. The same man he had dismissed, the same man he had refused service, was now being treated with the highest respect. Because now, Marcus owned everything around them. Richard gestured toward the elevator. "Sir, if you'd like, I can personally escort you to the executive lounge. Or if you prefer, we can discuss the next steps for the hotel in your private office." Marcus didn't rush. He took a slow look around the lobby, taking in every detail. Then his eyes landed on Ethan one last time. "You know," Marcus said thoughtfully, "I think I'd rather take a moment to appreciate the view." And with that, he walked away, leaving Ethan standing frozen behind the desk. The morning sun cast a golden glow over Manhattan, and the Regal Crown Hotel stood tall, its glass windows reflecting the city's energy. Inside, the air buzzed with quiet tension. The staff moved quickly, their usual confidence replaced with nervous glances. Something was different. The news had spread fast. Marcus Williams was not just a guest. He was the new owner. Behind the front desk, Ethan Carter felt a cold sweat on his back. The weight of the truth pressed down on him. He had made a mistake, a big one. And now, the very man he had looked down upon held his career in his hands. Ethan stole a glance toward the executive office on the top floor. Marcus was in there, sitting in the very chair that once belonged to the hotel's most powerful figures. But now he was the most powerful figure. Inside the office, Marcus leaned back in the leather chair, his fingers lightly tapping against the desk. Across from him sat Richard Hamilton, the hotel's general manager, who looked uncomfortable. Let's talk about the changes, Marcus said, his voice calm but firm. Richard nodded quickly. Of course, sir. We are ready to follow your leadership. Marcus didn't smile. He had heard words like these before. Empty promises, fake respect. He wasn't interested in that. I believe in quality service, Marcus continued. Every guest who walks through those doors should feel welcome. That includes people who don't look like they belong. Richard swallowed hard. He understood exactly what Marcus meant. Marcus let the silence stretch before speaking again. Tell me, Richard, how do you handle staff who don't follow this standard? Richard hesitated. Well, sir, we take disciplinary action if necessary. Marcus nodded. Good. Then let's start with the front desk. Richard stiffened. You mean Ethan Carter? Marcus's expression remained unreadable. He was quick to turn me away when he thought I was just another man walking in from the street. I wonder how many others he's treated the same way. Richard shifted in his seat. Sir, he's been here for a few years. He's good at his job. Was he good at his job the night I came in? Marcus asked, his voice quiet but sharp. Richard had no answer. Marcus stood up and adjusted his suit jacket. I don't fire people without reason, he said. But I also don't keep people who don't respect my values. Richard nodded quickly. Understood, sir. I will take care of it. Marcus walked to the window, looking out over the city. Make sure you do, he said. Downstairs, Ethan tried to act normal, but his hands were trembling as he typed on the computer. He knew what was coming. Moments later, Richard appeared, his face blank. He called Ethan aside. The conversation was quick, the decision final. And just like that, the man who once held the power to deny guests their stay was escorted out of the hotel. Justice had been served, and Marcus Williams. He wasn't done yet. The air inside Regal Crown Hotel felt different. It was no longer just a building filled with expensive chandeliers and polished marble floors. It was something more, a symbol of change, a place where power had shifted. Marcus Williams walked through the grand lobby, his sharp eyes taking in every detail. He noticed how the employees looked at him now, not with the forced politeness they gave to guests, but with something deeper. Respect, curiosity, maybe even admiration. But he wasn't here just to be admired. He was here to build something bigger than himself. For too long, places like this had been controlled by the same kind of people. The ones who decided who was worthy of luxury, who belonged and who didn't. Marcus had spent his whole life proving he deserved to be in these spaces, but now he wanted to do more than just prove a point. He wanted to open doors for others, the way no one had opened them for him. Later that afternoon, Marcus sat in the executive boardroom. A group of hotel executives and senior managers sat across from him. Their faces were tense, uncertain. They had built their careers in a world where people like Marcus didn't own places like this. But that world was gone. Marcus leaned forward, resting his elbows on the table. His voice was calm, but there was no mistaking the strength behind it. This hotel is going to be different, he said. We're not just running a business. We're setting a new standard. The executives exchanged glances. One of them, a middle-aged woman named Margaret Reeves, cleared her throat. Sir, if I may ask, what exactly do you mean by different? Marcus smiled slightly. He had been waiting for that question. We start by changing who gets the opportunity to be here, he said. I want to see more diversity in leadership, more people from different backgrounds, more chances given to those who never had them before. A man named Daniel Carter, one of the senior managers, frowned slightly. Sir, with all due respect, we have always hired the most qualified candidates. We follow standard industry practices. Marcus turned his gaze to Daniel. His voice didn't rise, but the weight behind his words was undeniable. Standard industry practices, Marcus repeated. The same practices that told me I didn't belong here. The same ones that let someone like Ethan Carter decide who was acceptable to stay in this hotel. Silence. Daniel shifted uncomfortably in his seat. He knew there was no defense for what had happened. Marcus continued, I want more training programs for underrepresented talent. I want internships for young people who never thought they could work in a place like this. I want partnerships with organizations that support diversity in business. He let his words sink in before adding, we are not just running a hotel. We are building a legacy. A few days later, Marcus walked through the hotel again, but this time, he wasn't alone. He had invited a group of young professionals, men and women who had struggled the way he once had. Some were fresh out of school, others had been turned away too many times from high-end businesses. But today, they weren't outsiders. Today, they were walking through a hotel that would soon have a place for them. Marcus watched as they looked around, taking in the beauty of the space. He saw the way their eyes filled with hope, the way their posture changed when they realized this place could be theirs too. A young woman named Lisa Turner, no older than 22, hesitated before speaking. Mr. Williams, I just wanted to say thank you. Marcus turned to her. For what? For giving people like us a chance, she said, her voice soft but steady. Most of us never even dream about working in places like this. But you're making it real. Marcus smiled. I'm not giving you a chance, Lisa. You've earned it. I'm just making sure the door is open. And as he looked around at the hopeful faces, he knew this was bigger than revenge. This was about building something that would last. The sun was setting over Manhattan, painting the sky in shades of orange and purple. Inside the Regal Crown Hotel, the warm glow of chandeliers filled the grand lobby, and guests moved about, unaware that something extraordinary had happened within these walls. Marcus Williams sat in his office, staring at the city skyline through the tall glass windows. His phone buzzed, lighting up with notifications. The story was out. News outlets, social media, and business blogs were all talking about the same thing. The man who had once been humiliated at the doors of this very hotel was now its owner. Marcus leaned back in his chair, exhaling slowly. He had known the story would gain attention, but he hadn't expected it to spread this fast. It had started with a journalist named Emma Brooks. She had reached out a week ago, requesting an interview. Marcus had almost said no. He had never been someone who enjoyed the spotlight. But something about Emma's approach was different. She wasn't just interested in his success. She wanted to understand the struggle behind it. So, he had agreed. And now, the world knew his story. The article wasn't just about business. It wasn't about wealth or power. It was about justice. Emma had written about that cold night when Marcus was turned away, about how he had walked out of the hotel feeling small, unwanted. She wrote about the years of hard work, the silent battles, the moments when it would have been easier to quit. And finally, she wrote about the moment Marcus walked back through the same doors, not as a guest, but as the man who owned the building. The story had gone viral. People across the country were sharing it, calling it a symbol of resilience and redemption. Business leaders were praising him. Young entrepreneurs were finding inspiration in his journey. And ordinary people, people who had faced rejection, humiliation, and obstacles just like Marcus had, were seeing a reflection of themselves in his story. A soft knock on the door pulled Marcus from his thoughts. Richard Hamilton, the hotel's general manager, stepped inside. He looked hesitant. "Sir, there's someone here to see you." Marcus raised an eyebrow. "Who?" Richard shifted uncomfortably. "Ethan Carter." For a moment, Marcus didn't say anything. He hadn't thought about Ethan since the day he had been escorted out. He had moved on. But now, Ethan was back. Marcus sighed, nodding. "Send him in." A few moments later, Ethan walked in. His posture was different now. His shoulders hunched slightly, his usual confidence replaced with unease. Marcus studied him for a moment before speaking. "What do you want, Ethan?" Ethan cleared his throat. "I read the article." His voice was quiet. I wanted to say I'm sorry." Marcus remained silent, waiting. Ethan exhaled. "I was wrong that night. I judged you without even thinking. And now, seeing everything you've done, I realize how blind I was. There was no arrogance in his tone, no excuses, just a man who knew he had made a mistake. Marcus leaned forward, folding his hands on the desk. You know, Ethan, I don't hold grudges, but I do believe in accountability. Ethan nodded quickly. I understand. Marcus studied him for another moment before speaking. What are you doing now? Ethan hesitated, looking for work. Marcus tapped his fingers against the desk, thinking. Then he made a decision. There's a hospitality training program starting here next month, Marcus said. It's for people who need a second chance in the industry. If you're serious about changing, you can apply. Ethan's eyes widened. You'd give me a chance. Marcus met his gaze. Someone gave me a second chance once. Now, I do the same for others. Ethan swallowed hard. Thank you, Mr. Williams. I won't waste it. Marcus nodded. See that you don't. As Ethan walked out of the office, Marcus looked back at the glowing city outside. His story had come full circle. And this was just the beginning. The grand ballroom of the Regal Crown Hotel was filled with quiet anticipation. Soft golden lights illuminated the space, casting a warm glow over the elegant crowd. Tonight was not just another event. It was a celebration of change, resilience, and new beginnings. At the center of it all stood Marcus Williams. He adjusted his cufflinks as he looked around the room. Familiar faces were scattered among the guests. Business leaders, young entrepreneurs, hotel staff, and even students from the new hospitality training program. Each person represented a part of the journey that had brought him here. Tonight, he would not talk about the past. He would talk about the future. A gentle tap on his shoulder made him turn. Emma Brooks, the journalist who had written his story, smiled at him. Quite the turnout, she said. Marcus nodded. It's bigger than I expected. Emma chuckled. Your story moved millions, Marcus. People don't just see you as a businessman. They see you as proof that things can change. Marcus let her words settle in. He had spent his life fighting for a place at the table, proving himself in ways others never had to. But now, he wasn't just fighting for himself. He was making sure others didn't have to fight the same battles. A staff member approached him. Sir, they're ready for you on stage. Marcus gave a small nod and made his way forward. The crowd fell silent as Marcus stepped onto the stage. He adjusted the microphone, looking out at the faces before him. For a moment, he just stood there. This was bigger than any speech he had ever given. Then he spoke. When I was a young man, I walked into this hotel one night, hoping for nothing more than a warm place to rest. He began. Instead, I was told I didn't belong. That moment stayed with me. It could have broken me. But instead, it became the start of something greater. He scanned the audience, making sure his words reached every corner of the room. We live in a world where doors are often closed before we even reach them. Some of us are told we are not enough, not rich enough, not powerful enough, not the right kind of person for success. But I stand here today to tell you this: you belong. A quiet murmur ran through the audience. People nodded, some leaning forward, hanging on to his words. The question is not whether the world will give you a chance, Marcus continued. The question is, will you take it anyway? He paused for a moment before going on. My journey was never just about owning a hotel. It was about proving that change is possible, that no one has the right to decide your worth except you. He gestured toward the young trainees sitting in the front rows, the future of the industry. I don't want to just build a business. I want to build opportunities. I want to see young men and women walk into places like this with confidence, knowing that they deserve to be here, not because they got lucky, but because they worked for it. Applause began to spread across the room. Marcus smiled, but his voice remained steady. This hotel is no longer just a symbol of wealth. It is a symbol of change. And tonight, I ask each of you to be part of that change. He stepped back as the applause grew louder, stronger. As he looked out at the crowd, asterisk asterisk at the faces of those who believed in his vision, asterisk asterisk, Marcus Williams knew one thing for sure. This was his legacy. And it was only the beginning.